Welcome back, or welcome for the first time. My name is Greg Farrar, and this is my approximately daily COVID-19 trends analysis live stream. I'm going to start with the countries, then I'll proceed to the states of the United States, and then finally to the counties of California. Typically, this is about 45 minutes. We'll see how long this one goes. Welcome back, or welcome there we for go the first again. Time. I keep doing this thing where I don't turn off my sound and then I hear myself a few seconds later. Okay, so total by country, still we have the United States far in the lead, more than double the total cases of anyone else, followed by Spain and Italy, Germany and France, United Kingdom and Iran and Turkey, and then the rest. I'm only showing the top 25 countries in terms of total or daily cases. So that's what we've been seeing. The United States is certainly way ahead of the curve. One interesting, or ahead of the pack, one interesting thing to notice about the curve here is that, no, actually this is backwards what I would expect. The curve of the United States alone, hello, come back, oh, here we go again. Sometimes this thing just loses its trend line and I have to reload. The United States curve is trending towards flattening out, though it's not at all visible, at least to my eyes, from that first view of things. The total numbers. So I don't usually care so much about the total numbers as much as the new daily numbers. That's the beginning, and then the one level down is the growth chart, the rope chart, which is my main tool here. But in new daily numbers, the United States leads, if anything, by even more, because many of these countries like Italy, Spain, and Germany are actually ahead of the ball, ahead of the curve on their epidemics. They're already well on their way to recovery. And the United States is really just turning around in the past few days. So in new daily cases, the United States still has quite a lot, where we see things like Spain starting to curve downward. Now, the United States really also looks like it's starting to curve downward. We'll see that more clearly in the next graph. But the trend line still points upward. It's still saying, well, maybe these are anomalous low points and not indicative of a new trend, and that could be the case. But from the graph on the next, the rope chart, I think we're going to see that's really not likely to be the case. These really are the beginning of a visible trend that pretty soon is going to turn the United States daily cases graph downward. And we can already see this happening on a lot of other countries. One of the reasons we can guess it's going to happen to the United States is it's happened everywhere else. Even more now than last time. All these countries that are starting to show this clear downward trend, Spain, Italy, the two big ones. Germany also is now, which also was really quite significant, and even now is having more cases than Italy. And really overall, in total cases, is matching right up with Italy and Iran. All of those starting to turn downward, well over the hump of their recovery, and Switzerland as well. Per capita, per million, we have the countries. The picture is rather different. We have, when we look per million, I'm sure Belgium is going to be here. Yep, there it is. Belgium is just about to be overtaken by Ireland, which is really having a problem right now. But Belgium and Ireland are certainly the ones that are looking the worst right here, sort of sharply upwards in new cases per million. We'll see what they look like on that, again, that growth chart. But mostly, and here we also have the United States also looking like it's sharply upward, though if we look at just the United States, it's pretty easy to imagine that might just be turning downward even right now. Let's see what Ireland's doing on this chart. Yeah, Ireland does not have that hookward downward that we're seeing in the United States. Ireland, as far as we can tell, is still shooting off to infinity. Not looking good for Ireland. All of these, of course, do eventually recover, but Ireland is on the rising portion of the curve. Belgium as well, shooting upwards pretty quickly. Belgium's now in the top 10, and they've got strong upward trajectory here. This again will show up better in the next graph. So other than noticing those, we're just going to continue on to my favorite, which is the rope chart. So the rope chart shows obvious downward trajectory. Starting around March 15th, we've seen all the countries' growth rates drop. Doesn't mean they're not getting new cases every day. It just means they're getting fewer and fewer growth of new cases every day. So where they may have had a 10% growth yesterday, now they've got a 5% new cases, more new cases, and now they've got 2% more new cases than yesterday. So that's what this chart means. It shows the growth of new cases each day, the growth rate. Here we have Japan. Okay, I thought that was going to be Belgium. Let's see where Belgium is. Russia, nope, Belgium is nowhere to be seen. We'll take a look at that a little bit later, but the outlier right now certainly is Japan, whereas almost every country is seeing the growth improve. It's heading towards that zero line where it actually has zero growth, where the number of cases is the same every day as the day before. That's the zero line. Below this zero line is where the number of cases is less every day than the day before on average. And above the zero line is where the number of cases is more every day than the day before. What we really hate to see is something that's above the line and slanted upwards, where they have a high growth rate and increasing. And Japan has got that right now. Japan is certainly the worst on this graph right now of these top 25. There may be smaller countries with fewer cases that have a worse curve than this, but in terms of the contribution to the world's cases, Japan is the winner. And it has a 24% growth rate right now, day over day, 24% new cases. That's bad. And we also see it rising. So let's take a little bit closer look at Japan. Where is Japan? Oh, Japan is still has very few cases. It's 25th in the world in terms of new daily cases, but it's had some really bad days. On the other hand, it has had one day, the most recent day. The average of the most recent 3 days, this point really means, is only 4% growth. So maybe Japan's gonna level out because they have few cases, these numbers can fluctuate a lot more than in something like the United States, where we see the trends are pretty stable. In the United States, for instance, we've crossed zero a week ago or so. The growth has been dropping in new cases. On average, fewer and fewer new cases each day in the United States, and these two latest points confirm that trend. Even the ones that are above here are still roughly on the line of the trend, and so the United States is looking good as a whole. We see New York dropping, and that contributes to this for sure, but the United States as a whole, I think, is actually ahead of New York in its recovery. We'll see that in the next page. But if we go to all the countries again, let's just see further. South Korea is dropping still. It was a possible epicenter. We even say it was an epicenter, but it got over it. It did extensive testing. South Korea is looking great with a 20% daily drop in new cases. And with a number like that, you're going to see it disappear from this list in a matter of days. It will no longer be a major contributor. South Korea has pretty much gotten over this, and there's no reason to believe that it won't fully recover in the weeks to come and see fewer and fewer cases. There might be second waves and little bumps, but with the infrastructure in place and an excess of testing capacity there, I think they just sent a bunch of test kits to the United States. So they like Washington State, have an excess of testing capacity. It's pretty likely that any new cases they're going to be able to trace them, and find out who else they might have infected and put a lid on it pretty quick. So this is where we want to be, where South Korea is right now. We want to be South Korea. Austria also looking very good, trending downward, negative 10% growth rate. Spain, Germany, the ones we saw before. Switzerland, which looked momentarily bad, is looking good now. Iran also. Israel, all of these clustering around negative 10% growth rate per day. The new cases are dropping each day. And it's getting even better. It's accelerating in how fast it drops. The exact opposite of Japan here, which has more new cases each day, and that growth is accelerating. A few other good ones: Canada, Portugal, Sweden. We keep talking about Sweden. Sweden, which has not been quite as aggressive as the rest of the world in trying to lock people down, nevertheless seems to have turned the corner days ago, seems to be getting over it. 22%, 13% reduction in new cases each day. So Sweden is perhaps a model for, at least for the next wave. Most countries have got this first wave already, but for the next wave, some countries might choose to emulate Sweden in this. They didn't lock down. They generally let people. They kept schools open, as I recall. Mostly, they did a lot of mitigation, but not the extreme things that have been done elsewhere. And in spite of that, they did recover. Certainly at the cost of some additional cases. Certainly at the cost of some life lost. But again, this is this trade-off of are you willing to sacrifice some lives for the general good, general health of the society, mental health, economic health. Very difficult decisions. Sweden made a different decision than the rest of the world, and as we can see, at least it didn't blow up on them. Let's see who's doing worse. So the worst of all is Japan, as we've seen. Ecuador, as we saw yesterday, Ecuador is just popping into the bottom 25. They've got a 13% growth rate and rising, so Ecuador is an upcoming epicenter if something doesn't change quickly. Russia is pretty bad in its growth rate, but at least now it's heading downward towards that zero line. We can imagine it hitting zero in just a few days. So Russia is just showing the first signs of getting over this. Peru and India, both looking pretty good compared to the top three, but not overall. Broadly, they're seeing a flat line. They're seeing 10% day-over-day growth. That's pretty extreme. We've seen a lot worse, but they're not getting better right now. They're not showing that they're getting better anyway. Maybe just the slightest bit by India. But on the other hand, India is one of our biggest concerns. So it's almost good news in a sense that India is seeing a flat line here rather than a shooting off upwards. Latest 3 days looking pretty good with only a 4% growth in new cases. So maybe India is going to nip this in the bud, and because there's such a potential for that one to go badly. But India is not looking as bad as, say, Japan right now. And then some of the other ones, Turkey, United Kingdom. You know, I just read something today, so some actually major headline, it was probably the front of CNN or maybe the front of Fox News, that was saying in India or United Kingdom, okay, Boris Johnson, almost said Yeltsin, Boris Johnson is getting better, but the UK is getting worse. That doesn't seem to be the case. I don't know where they're getting their numbers, because if you actually look at the United Kingdom, they seem to be getting better as a whole, just like Boris Johnson. They did have a period where it looked like things might go badly, but that was a long time ago. Their trend is really solidly downward. And so here's an example of another country that didn't take the epidemic too seriously, but then suddenly locked down, and they haven't turned the corner. They're still seeing 4% growth, but 4% isn't 20% like we sometimes see. And so the United Kingdom seems to be doing fine, just like Boris Johnson. And while we're talking, let's look at Brazil. Brazil, also a point of grave concern, partly because of the sort of light hand the government's taking on controlling the epidemic. Nevertheless, here's Brazil. Turning the corner today, probably getting better. It's another little data point that says we don't maybe need to lock down as hard as people think. I'm not suggesting, by the way, disobeying any of the current shelter-in-place orders. Different countries have different needs. The fact, even if Brazil really didn't need to lock down extremely, doesn't mean that the United States didn't need to. It doesn't mean that any of these places didn't need to. All the experts are being consulted, and the leaders are making decisions based on their experts' opinions. And I strongly recommend everyone follow their shelter-in-place orders. The next round, the experts will be looking at Brazil and saying, well, maybe we don't need to do it this time. Some of the experts will be maybe making different decisions when they look at Brazil, when they look at Sweden. So good news for Brazil, and really good news for the world. The world, clearly there are some problems up here, but the vast majority, most of the rope here is below zero already. We've turned around. The rest of it is headed there, except for just a few strands that, like especially Japan, that are going to need some attention. And we will be putting our attention on them in the days to come. Worldwide cases, this is the whole world as a whole. We've got a mini trend starting here. I think I called the peak of the world 2 days ago, and lo and behold, maybe it was 3 days ago, we're starting to see that. And really, no, I didn't actually. I really didn't. The trend is still upwards, and even on this graph, I think other people called the peak of the world a few days ago. My trend line's being conservative here. It's pretty possible to say, well, look at this little trend line. This isn't even a mini trend line. This is weeks long where the world has been dropping in new cases, and now we actually have a solid point below zero. Nevertheless, my trend line conservatively says we haven't turned around as a world. I did have a graph, that's right, I did have a graph a couple days ago that used a slightly different analysis, one that I don't actually like as well, that said we'd turned a corner a couple days ago, but this analysis doesn't agree. So maybe the world turned a corner a few days ago, maybe it still has 2 or 3 days to go. I think, based on that other graph and just the general trend we're seeing here, I would not be surprised if we started to see this turn farther downward and hit a peak according to this analysis in a day. In any case, the world is clearly headed in a good direction as a whole. This is not just the top 25, this is all of the countries combined. Therefore, population is considered, and as a whole, the world is headed in a good direction. But according to this, hasn't quite turned the corner. But one good day, 5% drop over the past 3 days average. So one point does not a trend make, but the trend is headed in the right direction. In terms of deaths, we can see those Italy and Spain, as always, looking good. The United States, not yet obvious to call a trend, a downward trend in the United States, but it certainly would be consistent. If there were a trend happening now to peak in deaths, this would be consistent. And the United States called a peak. Maybe it was Fauci, even someone, I don't think it was, but maybe the head of the CDC, someone said, we've peaked as of yesterday, the day before. And I guess if these numbers continue, that really was the peak 2 days ago. But our trend line doesn't believe it yet. It's still taking the conservative position that we're gonna continue heading upwards for a little bit before, and these are just outliers. I don't know. I tend to believe my trend lines, or at least go with them. So the United States not showing a clear peak in cases, but on the other hand, if we do look at the United States in the rope chart, it is showing the peak there. It's indicating that the peak is today. So we kind of have contradictory things. We've seen this before. The trend line going through this doesn't. It's a more conservative projection, and it doesn't take these few points as much evidence yet. But the trend that's actually looking at the next level down, the growth rates, the growth of growth, says, well, no, really, we have this very obvious downward trend. It's not. There aren't even a lot of outliers. This is averaged over 3 days anyway. So we've taken out some of the noise, and the United States really is looking in deaths. The United States appears to have peaked today, appears to be signaling a peak today. And that is interesting because, as I keep saying, it is strange to me that the United States, the peak of deaths is following just a few days after the peak in cases. 5 days after the cases peak, the deaths peak. And that's good news, because there have been guesses that it would be 14 days, and if it were, or even 24 days, if it were such an extreme, such a number as that, then we'd see a whole lot more people dead before this is over than we're seeing now. At this point, if the downtrend were if the downtrend were to be the same as the uptrend, right now the United States standing at, no, that's total cases. At total deaths, The downtrend probably won't be the same as the uptrend, by the way. When we look at places like South Korea, they continue to have deaths for quite a while. They have this long tail, as low as 40,000 total deaths in the entire epidemic in the United States. I think 60,000 is more likely. That's, I think, what the United States models are projecting now, but we'll see. Let's say 40 to 60 is my guess of how many total are going to die this year from coronavirus in the United States. It's a bold projection based on a relatively simple model here, but that's what I'm doing. That's the way I roll. So in the deaths then overall, Russia, interestingly, is still seeing a high number of deaths, even though their growth of cases isn't quite as high. In India is now seeing a spike of deaths. Again, India is pretty low in this list, so the numbers as a whole aren't super high. But those are the two that are really problematic right now. We have this small cluster of slightly problematic: Belgium, Peru, Chile, Canada, where their deaths certainly haven't peaked. Everything above zero, the deaths haven't peaked, and they're not even heading towards an obvious peak. So those four countries having some trouble. Oh, wait, did I say Canada in there? Okay, Canada actually is this line. It is heading for a peak. Canadian deaths, according to these trend lines, can be expected to peak in maybe a day, 2 days. So those are pretty good. But we have quite a lot of horizontal lines where the deaths are they're just continuing on, day over day, same number of deaths as the day before, or since they're above zero, a fixed percentage of deaths more than the day before. So deaths as a whole are not looking great in some of these countries, especially Japan. Oh yeah, there goes Japan again. Japan is really signaling an epidemic much worse than the rest of the world right now, both in new cases and in the angle. However, their number of cases still 25th in the world, so it's totally possible that they're just gonna test their way out of this, lock down their way out of this, and never really become anything remotely like the top 10. We'll be watching them. But in terms of deaths, the good news, Sweden, wow, Sweden's looking great. Dropping death rate of 17% every day. Germany, not too far off at 10% a day. Netherlands, Spain, France. There's one that's doing pretty well. Ecuador. See, we were having our eyes on Ecuador. Right now, the deaths have been dropping a lot in Ecuador for some reason. So Ecuador also indicates it may not become the next epicenter, though it has pushed its way into the top here. The world's death as a whole certainly look to just be rising. There is, again, this mini trend that one could read as a downward trend. And if I remember correctly, yeah, this is interesting. The trend line for the deaths of the world as a whole indicates that deaths are peaking today, April 13th. That as a world, we're going to see fewer and fewer deaths going forward. Some nations will rise, some will fall in their number of deaths, but the world as a whole appears to be dropping, and that is certainly largely due to the United States. You can see the United States with its five sharply downward trend in new deaths each day. If that continues, the United States has peaked and will be dropping. And if the United States drops, the world will drop, because the United States is the contributor right now of new daily deaths, as we can see in this graph. France and the UK might pick up the slack. Italy and Spain will be pulling in the opposite direction. But if the United States has peaked as the major contributor and number 4 and 5 have peaked, then number 2 and 3 are going to be fighting uphill struggle to drag the whole world down. And really, even if you look at the United Kingdom, yeah, as we've seen, even if you look at the United Kingdom, they're showing a mini trend just like everyone else, fewer deaths. So it's not at all clear that and let's look at France just to be complete. In the top 5, again, the latest data here are downward. So we may be seeing, let's look in the growth chart let's just look at the top 5 Deaths dropping. Yeah, I mean, look at that. Look at that. Everyone, all of the top 5 countries in new cases are at or below zero. The United States is the worst of them, just having dropped below zero. But in deaths, everyone is seeing fewer deaths. And interesting, we may find out at some point that the reason for this is not because it may not be because the number of cases dropped. It may be because we treated them better. We have these new drugs, experimental, but I have a suspicion that when things get really dire for someone, they just start giving them the new drugs, the anti-malarial, I can't quite come up with the name, but hydrochloroquine or something. The drug that several, it's not approved, not guaranteed to work, but several major experts are saying this probably isn't going to hurt. And it shows some success in some of the early trials. The clinical trials aren't done. But if it turns out that drug or others like it, there's another one as well, are in fact successful on this, I think what we're going to find is that as of a week or two ago, doctors just started giving it in hope because they thought these people were going to die, may as well give them the drug. And then when we find out from clinical trials that these really were effective, then we'll say, that's why the death rate dropped. It's because people were giving these experimental drugs as a couple weeks ago, and so same number of cases, still growing epidemic, but the death rate dropped. And this is why maybe we see this crazy thing where the world's death rate has peaked, is showing every sign of peaking, while the world's number of cases hasn't peaked. And I was trying to say, how could this be? Is it a delay in reporting? That's another possibility. Well, one way it could be is we're just getting better at treating. And another way that we may be getting better at treating is that we have more capacity in our healthcare system. Not only have we built more as we saw these things coming, but as people are getting better in certain areas, we're shifting healthcare resources to other areas. So maybe it's just that people are being seen early. We have cases of people dying in hallways because they haven't even really been able to be seen yet. It may be happening that's not going to be the case anymore, that there's enough capacity, the healthcare systems are not overloaded, or just enough less overloaded that at least everyone who's on the verge of dying gets a ventilator or gets an experimental drug, and maybe that's why the death rates are dropping. So whatever the reason, it is fascinating to me, and I keep coming back to this, the world death rate seems to have peaked even though the number of cases in the world has not yet peaked. Interesting. Okay, well, I'm trying to switch to the state tab, but it's taking its time. So let me just talk a little bit. Probably should have switched to the state tab while I was talking about death rates. We have been, in the states we're going to see, here they come, New York and I think California continue to have, in my data set, a problem where they report 0 cases for the current day. Other states aren't doing this, so I don't want to throw out the whole day of data. And I haven't gotten at least as fancy as to try to selectively throw out days that are the same as yesterday. So just keep in mind that in the case of New York and probably California, no, actually California's good today. Is it Michigan? Nope, Michigan's good too. Maybe just New York. The numbers we're going to see here are slightly optimistic, 1-2% more optimistic than they should be, because New York, according to this data set, had no new cases today, and we know that's not true. So New York leads, New Jersey leads, nothing new there. Michigan, though, that's been up and coming. That is interesting. Michigan is becoming a solid third place for the total cases in the United States. Daily cases, New York, you can see, is really leveling off, even dropping. There's this slight downward trend we keep seeing. In other countries, it's like just the last few days, we keep seeing this mini downward trend of 2 really good days, where yesterday or the day before was substantially lower, and then 2 days ago, or yesterday was also substantially lower. And that's interesting, not too early to call it, but I just keep seeing this thing where, whoa, 2 days of really good data. If that's actually a trend, then we'll see a sharp downturn in everything, and we could be turning the corner more than just in growth, but in new cases. Everything could be swooping downward in a matter of days. Too soon to say, but interesting to note. New York, New Jersey, still the country will go as those states goes. If they recover, the whole country's numbers will drop because it's going to take a lot of mass from these other states to outweigh the contribution of New York and New Jersey. So New York and New Jersey still trending upwards, though. I think we'll see on the next graph. This is again a matter of these trend lines saying, well, we were going upward for a long time, and I know we've got 5 days that say it's not doing that, but we're just going to keep going upwards for a little bit more until we're not quite going to believe just a little bit of data. So these trend lines are doing a very good job of conservatively estimating the trend. The next graph is more aggressive in the way that it estimates trends. Massachusetts, sadly, Connecticut, these in per capita are up and coming states. They are not leveling off. You might even, well, they may be going flat at this point, but they're not turning down yet. Let's just look at those, see how big they are anyway, in terms of, there we go. Yeah, Massachusetts number 4, and Connecticut is number 12 or something. These are adjusted by population. We could imagine that Connecticut is seeing that kind of downturn that we've seen elsewhere. I'm guessing the next graph will say Connecticut is recovering. Massachusetts, not at all obvious that it's recovering. Massachusetts is showing at least a flat trend and maybe even an upward one. So that's one to watch. But as we look through the top states and just look at the rough shapes of their dots and their curves, everyone's looking pretty good here, except Massachusetts, which isn't looking too terrible. California even. Come on, California, show us something. Yeah. Well, California has, well, okay. California, I don't have data for, data was not reported in this data set for yesterday, but it's here today. That yesterday's data is included in today. That means that this dot really probably should be around here. It's 2 days of data. We have it, we get a dot that's around here. And so California really looking good in the downslope if its last dot is here and the dot before it as well. We sort of have 2 dots right here. The trend is many days long now in the right direction for California. Look at Colorado for the moment, because we have Colorado lovers among us. The trend is pretty good for Colorado. Pretty good. It's at least leveling out flat, but we do have the last 4 days are a little bit higher than 3 days before it. So Colorado maybe is showing a little bit of an upswing. Look at Ohio just for kicks. Yep, leveling out. But let's go to the one that I really like, the rope chart. I love the way this one's holding together. This looks like it's literally a rope. There's almost no strands heading out from the main pack. The main pack is heading in a very clear direction, which is downward, which is good. It's mostly dropped below zero. The United States as a whole has turned the corner, and almost all the states, let's say most of the states, have also turned that corner. We'll look at a few exceptions. Louisiana is looking great. Very good news, because they were a real hot spot. People were worried. I don't think we need to worry about Louisiana. Georgia also looking great. Also great news, because Georgia is another example of a state that maybe hasn't done everything other states have done, and yet to combat this thing, and yet they're doing great. Michigan also, Washington, we expect to be doing great because they've long since got over this, or are very much on the downhill slope. But Michigan was also looking like a possible hot spot. But here we go, below zero, negative growth of 10% a day, trending downward. Michigan's looking great. Louisiana even better. New Jersey, negative 12%. This is probably New York. No, that's Georgia. Where is New York? I think New York's blue. I'm starting to memorize these colors. New York looking great. 7% drop of new cases each day, trending sharply downward. All of these, I'll spin over them. You can slow down the video if you want to see your favorite state. All of these doing the same thing. Then we have the pack above, which is also doing well, trending downward. We see someone here just turned the corner. North Carolina just turned the corner. Virginia's about to. Alabama, Indiana, Illinois also, we were worried about Illinois. Still has growth day over day. Hasn't turned the corner, but its growth is 2%, and the trend of that growth is downward. So Illinois is looking good. Not in the top of the nation, certainly. It's in the bottom of the nation and how well it's doing relatively, but there's no one here doing badly. The worst one is Massachusetts. Massachusetts has an 8% growth. That's not too bad, but it's not getting better. The trend is flat. So Massachusetts is one to be worried about. Texas also not doing great. The trend of growth at least is downward, but it is still seeing new cases every day, 5% new cases every day. But yeah, if you joined me 2 weeks ago, this is so much better. This is so much better. The United States unanimously, the top 25 states turning the corner, with the only exception of being Massachusetts, and that's not something to really worry about, I don't think. We'll watch it. Maybe it'll shoot upwards, but we generally see that once these things head downward, they don't turn around. So this is why the country has turned the corner. This is great news for the United States. And for all of its states, there may be some there are 25 plus states and territories that aren't being included in this analysis. But those are included in the overall, now I've done it, tried to click on the country and it's spinning again. The overall analysis of the United States also says things are doing well. So yeah, my cursor is spinning, you probably can't see it, but yeah, okay, now here we go. I was just trying to see what's the United States trajectory. As a whole, yes, the United States has turned the corner, is just turning the corner, and is heading into this positive direction. Running a little low on time here. I'll just say test results by state. The very lowest here, not including Washington, is actually let me do that per population. Test results per state. The lowest, 0.4%, more than 0.4%. Anyone who's above 0.4% is doing well by my reckoning. So all the states are doing well in testing. All of them have tested more than 0.4% of their population, and they're testing more people every day. More good news for the United States. New York and Louisiana will probably be, Louisiana are blowing the lid off in testing, 2% plus, and there are a few others that are doing very well with Massachusetts, Washington State, in total testing, Washington State, let's just take a look at this, because if you look at Washington State, it's like, wow, they've tested 1.6%, 1.5% of the population. And that's great, but it's interesting, they're not testing anymore. They don't have many more to test, it seems. This is the trends we're going to see, and we can look at them down here. As Washington really gets over its epidemic, it got it first and it got over it first. It just doesn't seem to be testing anymore, as though there were no one else to test. I'm sure it's doing some testing, but by testing 1.5% of its population, it reached a place where it just didn't need to do much more. Well, I guess it really only tested 1.3% of the population. The trend line hasn't caught up with that yet, but 1.3% is great. Washington did it. Washington turned the corner, and now we see in new cases. Let's look at Washington's new cases. 200 new cases a day. It still has some, but it's got massive ability to handle these cases now that it didn't have when it started, but it developed, and it's got an excess of capacity in its healthcare system to handle and track those cases. So Washington has this licked. Moving on to the counties of California. As always, Los Angeles leads the pack with the most cases. San Diego, Riverside, Orange County. This is in total cases. Let's move on to the new daily cases. Los Angeles still leading. Had a pretty bad day here. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is another case where Los Angeles, I don't have 1 day of data, so it reported 2 days of data on that day. So this data point is really here. I think if you can see my cursor, I hope you can see my cursor. It's about halfway down right here. And that's great news for Washington. Los Angeles. This is not a high outlier. This is just it doing very well. Los Angeles totally going to be heading downward here. This trend line doesn't quite believe it, but if we look at our rope chart, there's going to be no doubt Los Angeles is doing well in trending. It's been doing well for days. That again is an outlier, as is that. But these two average out, and the trend is looking good for Los Angeles, and therefore good for the state as a whole, because Los Angeles is pretty much the state when it comes to coronavirus. Let's look at a few other big counties. Santa Clara, big-ish counties. Santa Clara, new cases. Orange, San Diego. None of these really contribute compared to Los Angeles. So I'm just going to go straight to the trends. And this is cases per million. We will look briefly. San Francisco is our trouble spot for sure. Though maybe it's good news that San Francisco has a giant outbreak in I think a particular homeless shelter. The good thing about that is that it's contained, and if those people in that shelter aren't going outside of the shelter a lot, then maybe there's not actually a trend upward in San Francisco. There was just an outbreak like what we saw in Washington State in the retirement community, or the nursing home, I forget exactly what it was. We can put a lid on it, we can lock it down, we can treat everyone, and this may not actually indicate a bad trend for San Francisco. But in the very short term, it certainly looks bad as we see this upward tick of cases. So watch this space. I guess this is another case there where we have a high and a low, and so the latest data point is somewhere around 40 here in the middle. And so if we just say, well, maybe that was just a whole bunch of people in the shelter getting it all at the same time, then maybe San Francisco isn't as bad as it looks. But right now it looks bad. It certainly looks, it's the worst of these in the way it's trending per million. It actually has passed Los Angeles per million, and is the obvious leader. Riverside, Santa Clara, San Diego, Orange County are other major contributors. But the rope chart is mixed. In counties, we see certainly the trend looks to be downward, and certainly the rope as a whole has crossed zero here. So all of these counties are seeing not only negative growth, but I think in all cases, their growth is trending downward. So great. Solano, Placer, San Mateo, Alameda, Los Angeles, the biggest one, trending solidly downward, 15% negative growth each day, 15% fewer new cases each day, and heading even lower than 15. Santa Barbara, San Mateo, Tulane, Santa Cruz, all of these, Sonoma, and just barely Kern has just turned the corner. All of these counties looking good. When these things cross zero, they often don't come back. So that's usually good news, and from a long-term perspective. On the other hand, here's one who's heading up, San Luis Obispo and Marin. There are 4 that are in that place. 5 that we hate to see, which is in San Francisco is one of them. Subject to that thing about homeless shelter, San Francisco is the worst of the news here by far. Well, maybe not by far. 13% growth and rising every day. But we also have Santa Clara, also very bad news, 12% growth and rising. Santa Clara was, let me actually look, see if is it really true that when they cross zero, they don't come back? Well, no, because Santa Clara had looked like it was crossing zero, but it never quite made it. Something's happening in Santa Clara. This point may again be the 2 days canceling out, but so this point may not be quite believable. We can average them to around where it is right now, but still the trend is upwards, and Santa Clara, for whatever reason, I haven't heard news about this one, is not leveling off, is not heading downward. Santa Clara is our worst county right now, except for San Francisco. So looking just a little bit more at some of the counties we do have, Riverside continues its slow trek towards zero. It's at about 2% growth now, and just gradually getting better. It was pretty bad a couple weeks ago, so good for Riverside. Stanislaus, I don't even remember seeing that in our list. It is at 5% daily growth and trending downward. So maybe it's just displaced someone here in the top 25, because I don't remember ever saying that name in these in this series before. And then Sacramento, unfortunately, not quite recovered, not turning the corner at this point, heading flat out, a small growth rate of 2 or 3%, but not heading downwards. So we'll have to watch that one. And that is the county news. Let's just take one quick look at the testing. We do have testing for many counties now. San Francisco is doing very well in testing. 0.8% of the population tested. Of course, that's nothing like New York with its 2 point something percent, but still, testing overall doing is good in San Francisco. What was our problem county? That was Santa Clara, I believe. The other problem was Santa Clara. Let's see how their testing's going. Is that it? I hope. Yes, Santa Clara also, San Mateo, Marin. Santa Clara, though, also doing good testing. So even though Santa Clara's and San Francisco are on a bad trajectory, they're doing what they need to. They've both got shelter-in-place orders. They've had them for a long time, and they have testing that's happening at, I would have, a week ago, I would have said 8% of the population is world-class testing. Now we see these other really crazy testing rates, and so I don't even know if you need to go above 8% to put a lid on the epidemic. Certainly South Korea did it without going into these really high percentages. But I don't think testing can be a bad thing, but it does mean that I'm not too worried that San Francisco and Santa Clara are not doing as much testing as, say, New York. They're still heading upwards in their testing. Do we have anything else about that? No, we don't. So bottom line, everything looks good. Everything looks good. We might worry a little bit about India, but it hasn't, other than just sort of common sense saying that India should be a problem. The data don't show that, so I'm not yet worried about India. We're just going to keep watching it. We were worried about Michigan, but no. We were worried about Louisiana, but no. The big places are all recovering. There just doesn't seem to be anything here. I don't think that there was a single thing that I saw today where I said, this is a real problem. And that was all over the place 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, it looked like things were headed probably in the right direction mostly, but there were real problems. Italy, Spain, the United States, California, New York, and then there were possible up-and-coming problems. Michigan, Illinois, Louisiana. Actually, I'm just going to briefly pop back to Illinois because I don't know if I mentioned it, but Illinois is maybe the closest we have to anything resembling a problem right now, like a problem that's not getting better. No, I want to see the rope chart. Illinois. No, I take it back. Even Illinois is fine. They're above zero, sure, but they're not trending upward. No one's trending upward. So, yay. Hooray. Keep sheltering in place, keep social distancing. But if the politicians are watching this, they're going to be saying, hey, it's time. It's getting to be time that we can start relaxing. Please don't do it unilaterally, but everything's looking a lot better than it did 2 weeks ago, and I think in another 2 weeks, I would say I would be amazed if we haven't seen significant relaxation of restrictions worldwide, except in hotspots, are looking better, and we really have we're showing all evidence of licking this thing. Thanks for listening. I'm Greg Farrar. I'll be back tomorrow.